Hey guys, Karenology here. This one is pure gold. Pettiness, drama, and an ending that will leave you speechless. They say you can tell what kind of man you are by the way you react when someone dumps a mountain of gravel on your father's land. I never thought I'd be the kind of man who'd stand in silence, fists clenched, feeling 30 years of memories crumble beneath a steel gray heap of rock. It was early spring when I moved back to my hometown. After the divorce, after the layoffs, after the markets fell through, and the silence in my apartment grew too loud, I packed what was left of my pride into a pickup and drove back to the hills of Virginia. My father, Graham, still lived in the same cedar house he built with his own hands. He was 74, sharp as a rusted nail, but stronger than most men half his age. The land sloped gently behind his house, once a lush orchard, now just naked earth with ghosts of roots and soil that still remembered. We'd planned to restore the orchard together. It was supposed to be simple: dig, plant, water, watch things grow again. I needed that. He did too. At our age, sometimes it's not about what you build. It's about what you rebuild. But rebuilding means nothing if the land won't let you. Or worse, if someone else decides it won't. The day the trucks came, I was fixing the hinges on the old shed. The first rumble felt like thunder, only closer. I walked out and saw them. 3 massive dump trucks, each bearing the logo of a company I didn't recognize, crawling up the private road like beetles on a carcass. I waved them down. The foreman barely looked at me. "Work order," he said, and dropped a sheaf of paper into my hands. It was stamped with the name of the Homeowner Association. "Drainage mitigation," the order said. "Erosion control for community access road." Community road? There was no road on this slope, just our orchard, or what used to be one. The gravel poured out like a stone avalanche, flattening the southern side of the hill, choking the roots we'd just uncovered last week. I shouted. I pleaded. My father stood beside me, jaw tight, arms folded. He didn't yell. He didn't move. He just watched. Later that night, I found him at his old drafting table. The thing was a relic: oak legs, leather inlay, a lamp older than me. He was sketching. Cross-sections, elevations, runoff trajectories. The same neat handwriting he used to label blueprints back when he was designing bridges for the state. They think we're too old to push back," he muttered. "That's their first mistake." I didn't know what to say. I just stood there, watching the lamplight flicker over his wrinkled brow. The next morning, I went to the Homeowner Association office to demand answers. Jim Landon met me at the door. Late 50s, slick haircut, polo shirt stretched too tight over a belly that said more steakhouse than Jim. He smiled like a man who'd rehearsed it in a mirror. "Michael, great to see new energy back in the community. We're just doing what's best for all residents. Safety first, right? You buried our land." He shrugged. "It's not personal. The board approved it. If you have a complaint, you're welcome to attend the monthly meeting." "Hey, you mean the one where you talk and everyone else nods?" His smile thinned. "We follow procedure. We don't like troublemakers." I left before I did something unwise, but my blood boiled all the way home. That night, Graham pulled out an old contact list. Guys from his days in the field. Surveyors, builders, one retired journalist. He said it was time to find out where that gravel really came from. "Follow the rocks," he said. They'll lead us to the rot. 2 days later, Jerry showed up. Big guy, beard like a pine cone, voice like gravel itself. He used to run excavators back in the day, now mostly gardened and helped out at the VFW. He looked at the slope and spat on the ground. That's construction fill, leftovers, probably from a cheap build site nearby. They dumped it here 'cause it costs to haul to a legal yard. You got played. We did more than get played. We got robbed. That night, I sat on the porch with my dad. The stars above us were the same as when I was 10. But the land below, it was wounded. I won't let them bury what we built, I said. He didn't reply, just nodded and kept sketching. By the end of that week, we weren't just planning to remove gravel. We were planning to return it, but not in the way they expected, and not without leaving a mark. By Monday, the rumors had already started. Someone at the Homeowner Association must have said something at the church breakfast or down at Millie's diner, because people I hadn't seen in years were suddenly driving past, slow, squinting through their windshields, like we were some kind of backwoods rebels. I could almost hear their thoughts. That old Graham still kicking? And his boy? I thought he left for good. We didn't hide. My father sat out on the porch in his usual chair, same one he built in '89, sipping black coffee like it was just another week in paradise. I joined him, though I couldn't quite fake the calm. The gravel sat there on our land like an insult you couldn't sweep away. The air smelled like crushed limestone and loss. Jerry came back with a name. Greystone Developments. He said the trucks came from their site 2 miles up the ridge, where a new row of townhouses was going up faster than weeds in July. Jerry had a cousin who worked cleanup, said they were behind schedule and over budget, and someone figured out it was cheaper to offload the excess fill wherever nobody would notice. Except we noticed. We went to the county office to check permits. The woman at the desk, name tag said Connie, looked about my age and remembered me from high school. She smiled, then frowned when she pulled the folder. This road work? It doesn't show any environmental assessment. No drainage review either. That's not normal. I asked for copies. She hesitated, then slipped me the forms with a whisper. Be careful. People tied up in this don't like sunlight. That night, I showed my father the papers. He nodded once. They're laundering waste through the association, he said. Hiding costs under community upgrades. Seen it before. In '84, when they built that strip mall on Swinton, same game. He stayed up late that night, with Jerry in the garage. The place still smelled like diesel and sawdust. I watched from the kitchen as they laid out topographical maps, old blueprints, soil charts. It was like watching two retired generals planning one last campaign. Tuesday morning, I woke up to the sound of my father pulling out stakes and laying survey tape. I grabbed coffee and joined him. We're not just going to dig, he said. We're going to regrade. He showed me the plan. Redirect the runoff, create a channel that would follow natural contours, and, if timed right, carry the next heavy rain downhill, through the fence, and straight onto the back half of Landon's lot. Gravel wants to move, he said. We're just helping it find its way home. Later that afternoon, we were visited by someone unexpected. Her name was Lena. Late 50s, tall, lean, sharp eyes that saw through nonsense. She introduced herself as a former geodetic technician who'd done work for the county decades ago. She'd heard about our situation through Jerry. "I can help," she said, and handed us a rolled-up hydrology map. "This slope? It's a conduit. But if you want it to carry gravel downhill, you'll need weight and timing." We worked together for hours. She marked weak points, runoff paths, places where pressure would build. She wasn't just smart. She had that rare kind of practical wisdom only earned through decades in the field. She and my father got along like they'd worked together 100 years. That night, we sat by the fire pit. Lena told stories about crooked land developers, forgotten flood zones, how cities buried their own history in concrete. Jerry nodded along, poking the fire. My father listened quietly, the corners of his mouth twitching up ever so slightly. For the first time in weeks, I saw a light in his eyes. The next morning, Jim Landon drove by in his silver SUV. He didn't stop, just looked. I saw the twitch in his jaw when he noticed the stakes and flags dotting our land. He knew something was coming. He just didn't know what. 2 hours later, the association posted a notice on our door. "Cease and desist all unauthorized land modification. Failure to comply will result in fines and potential legal action." I tore it down. They wanted war? They'd get it, but we'd fight it like old men do. Slow, smart, and without wasting bullets. It rained hard that Thursday. Not the kind of drizzle that dampens porches and makes the air smell like cedar, but a full-throated southern downpour. Water gushed from gutters, hissed off the tin roof, and roared down the hill with the force of a memory refusing to be buried. I stood at the edge of the slope, boots sunk in mud, watching it happen. The trench we dug, the diversion channel Lena marked, the little retaining ridge Jerry built with his backhoe, it all worked like clockwork. The water pulled the gravel downhill in thick, grinding sheets, carving its way through the barrier fence and right into the backyard of Jim Landon. I'll never forget the sound it made when it hit his patio. A hard, scraping, unstoppable slide. Nature's apology for human arrogance. It flooded his koi pond, filled the fire pit, and buried the stepping stones under a foot of corporate negligence. By the time I got back to the house, soaking wet and cold to the bone, Dad was already on the porch with a towel and a mug of coffee. "Well," he said, "we just returned a favor." I grinned, but it didn't last. That afternoon, a deputy cruiser pulled up our drive. Sheriff Hank Mercer stepped out. Same Hank who once taught me how to fish when I was 10. Same man who arrested my cousin when he tried to sell fake tools out of his garage. Fair man, but not one to look the other way. "Mike," he said, nodding. "Graham, we got a situation." He showed us photos. Landon's property, the gravel pile, the water damage. Landon claimed we had maliciously altered the terrain and caused intentional property damage. Filed a report. Threatened to sue. I waited for Hank to finish his warning, but he just looked at me. You know, I've never been a fan of how that association runs things," he said. "But the law's the law? You boys have proof this was just runoff?" Dad stepped inside, came back with Lena's map, Jerry's statement, photos of the slope before and after the dump trucks. Hank took it all in quietly. I'll need to file a report," he said. "But I'm not pressing charges. Not yet. Just keep your heads down and stay dry. As he drove off, I looked at Dad. This just got real. He nodded. Good. Maybe now people will start looking. That night, Jerry came over with a flash drive. He'd flown a drone over the Greystone construction site and filmed one of their trucks dumping gravel near our property line. Time stamped. Clear as day. This, he said, is how you break a wall of lies, one brick at a time. I sent the footage to Lena, who forwarded it to an old friend of hers, a retired land use attorney named Carl Bixby. He called the next morning. I've seen this kind of stunt before, Carl said, voice scratchy but firm. Homeowner Associations laundering construction waste as infrastructure improvements. I'll draft a preliminary complaint, but you'll need leverage. And fast. We got it the same day. Connie from the county clerk's office called me at lunch. Mike, remember that work order? Well, I dug deeper. The signatures don't match. Looks like someone forged the board approval. Might be criminal. I thanked her and hung up, hands shaking. It wasn't just petty bureaucracy anymore. It was fraud. We held a meeting that night. Me, Dad, Lena, Jerry, and now Carl gathered around the kitchen table, coffee mugs and printouts everywhere. The plan? Present the evidence to a select group of residents. Build quiet support. Make the association nervous, because when you can't fight a war head-on, you bleed them from the edges. We chose 5 people to talk to, all longtime residents, all respected. Martha, the retired librarian. Al, a former Marine. Henry and Janet, who ran the food pantry. And Roy, who used to teach civics at the high school. They listened. They asked hard questions. Then they nodded. Roy said, "If half of what you're showing is true, this whole board's a house of cards. And I'd love to be the one to pull the bottom." The next day, Landon showed up again. No SUV this time. He came on foot, sweating, red in the face. He pounded on the screen door. You think this is over? You think you can undermine the association? You've made enemies, Graham. Big ones. Dad looked at him, calm as ever. You came to the wrong porch with that tone. Landon growled something I didn't catch and stormed off. That night, someone cut the wire to our motion lights. The garden gate was left open. One of our saplings had been snapped clean in half. I didn't sleep. This wasn't just about gravel anymore. This was a war for the soul of a neighborhood. Friday morning, I found my father cleaning his old rifle. He wasn't loading it. He wasn't even checking the sights. Just polishing the walnut stock with slow, patient hands, like he used to do on Sunday evenings, back when I was a boy. It wasn't a threat. It was a message, a quiet one. For himself, mostly. You think they'll come back? I asked, pouring us both coffee. He looked up. They already did. Now they're just deciding how bold they want to be. After what happened with the lights and the sapling, we took turns watching the property. Jerry moved his truck closer to the fence line, and Lena offered to spend the night in her camper parked near the road. There was something unspoken between all of us. Why? Carl sent us a draft of the legal complaint. 36 pages detailing the gravel dump, the forged work orders, the use of HOA funds without consent. It was a bomb waiting for the right room. Not yet, Dad said, reading through the draft. We don't want to play our hand too early. Let them think we're just rattling chains. In the meantime, Roy and Martha helped us quietly reach more residents. We didn't stir up gossip, just shared the facts. Photos, drone footage, county forms. By the end of the weekend, we had 12 families ready to sign a petition calling for an emergency audit of the Homeowner Association. That was the same day Landon made his move. Without warning, a private security firm hired by the HOA blocked off the southern edge of our property with temporary fencing. They claimed it was a safety perimeter due to instability caused by unauthorized landscaping. Dad and I stood there, staring at the fresh chain link and the hired guards in matching jackets. One of them, a guy young enough to be my nephew, held up a clipboard and said, "You'll need to vacate the lower slope until we complete the inspection." Inspection by who? I asked. He didn't answer. Lena took photos. Jerry took note of their truck's license plates. That night, I got a call from Connie. Her voice was low, urgent. "Mike, someone came into the county office asking about your father's original property plat." Not a resident, someone in a suit. They wanted to know where the old easement boundaries were. "You might want to lock your files." I thanked her, and then I called Carl. They're trying to contest ownership," he said, probably digging for technicalities in the survey. "Old easements, utility rights, access paths. You'd be surprised what 20-year-old paper can do in court." He was right, and it scared me. The next morning, I dug into the basement and pulled out an old metal box. Inside were my grandfather's land records, deeds, and handwritten notes dating back to the 60s. Pages yellowed with time, smelling like dust and oil. One sheet caught my eye, a signed statement from a 1971 boundary. Agreement with a neighboring farmer, long deceased. It showed the natural runoff path and clearly marked our property line. Exactly where the association's new fence had been planted. It wasn't just proof, it was a hammer. That same afternoon, we called a meeting. Not a board meeting. Not official. Just neighbors. We met in Roy's barn. Folding chairs, thermoses, pie from Janet's kitchen. We laid everything out. Documents, footage, fraud. We didn't yell. We didn't need to. The facts did all the shouting. Henry stood up. "So, what's the plan? We throw the bums out?" Dad stood, slow and sure. "No, we shine light on them, and we let them run from it." That night, the petition went public. We shared it online. Carl sent a copy to the local paper. Lena posted the drone video with a caption. "This is what community abuse looks like." The next morning, Landon filed a restraining order against my father. It claimed he was inciting unrest, threatening board members, and illegally altering common land. It was nonsense, but it meant one thing: he was afraid. And men like Landon? They only act afraid when they've already started losing. I never thought I'd see my father in a courtroom again. Not since Mom died. But there he was on Monday morning, standing tall in a Navy sport coat that hadn't fit quite right since the 90s. Face unreadable except for the faint fire behind his eyes. The hearing for the restraining order wasn't long, but it was enough to show me how far Landon was willing to go. His lawyer was one of those polished types. Expensive tie, smug tone, lots of phrases like ongoing disruption of neighborhood harmony and escalating hostility. They tried to paint my father as some kind of vigilante, said he was harassing board members, that his presence alone intimidated people. I nearly laughed. Then Carl stood. No suit. Just a brown corduroy jacket and a stack of folders. "Your Honor," he said, steady as a metronome, "we submit this restraining order was filed not out of fear, but out of retaliation against my client and his son for uncovering what can only be described as systemic misuse of Homeowner Association funds, falsified documents, and unauthorized land alterations." He handed over the files. The judge, a gray-haired woman with the tired look of someone who'd seen too much nonsense and not enough truth, reviewed them quietly. In the end, she dismissed the restraining order and added a note. "This court recommends immediate third-party review of Homeowner Association project approvals for the last 12 months. Outside the courthouse, Dad and I shook hands with Carl. He looked pleased in his low-key way. They'll retaliate," I said. "Of course," Carl said. "But now they're reacting, and that means they're on the back foot." Back home, the tension was thicker than humidity. In August, the guards were still posted by the makeshift fence, but they no longer met our eyes. People had started talking. Lena came by that evening. She'd been reviewing old aerial images from the county archives and had found something interesting. A pattern of changes to the terrain across several other properties. Subtle stuff. Shifting drainage, quiet gravel dumps, unexplained erosion near HOA projects. We weren't the first. "They've been doing this for years," she said. "You're just the first to push back." That's when I knew this was bigger than our hill. Roy, ever the civics teacher, proposed a full public forum, an unofficial town hall, not controlled by the association, not on their turf. We chose the community park, the same field where kids played flag football and retirees played shuffleboard on Tuesdays. Flyers went out. Calls were made. Word spread the way it always does in small towns. Through coffee, sidewalks, and Sunday mornings. The night of the meeting, over 50 people showed up. We didn't rant. We presented. Carl laid out the timeline. Lena displayed maps. Jerry showed the drone footage. I stood beside my father as he explained what happened to our land. Then we opened the floor. A woman named Teresa, quiet, mid-60s, always kept to herself, stood up and said her garden had flooded after a HOA project 3 years ago. They told her it was a natural shift in grade. A man named Alan said his back porch now sat on soft earth, and no one ever explained why. Martha shared how her HOA dues had increased 30% without proper vote. It was like watching a dam crack. By the end of the night, we had signatures. Not just for an audit, but for a vote of no confidence in the board. Landon included. The next morning, Landon called an emergency HOA meeting. No public notice. No minutes posted. We only found out because one of our allies, Henry, happened to walk by the clubhouse and see cars. They were scrambling, but desperate men make sloppy moves. Carl filed for an injunction to freeze any new HOA spending until the audit concluded. Lena's post had been shared over 1,000 times. A small local news outlet picked up the story. They asked for an interview. Dad declined. "I'm not doing this to be famous," he said. "I just want my trees back." But I did the interview. I told them everything. The footage ran that Friday evening. Nothing flashy, just facts, photos, and a calm voiceover explaining how a retired bridge engineer and his son pushed back against a quiet abuse of power. That night, someone threw a brick through our window. There was no note, no spray paint, just broken glass on the kitchen floor and a cold wind slipping through the silence. Jerry was at our door 10 minutes later, holding a crowbar. I'll keep watch tonight," he said. "Some people don't know how to lose." I looked at my father. He was sweeping the glass slowly, carefully, like a man tending a wound. "You still want those trees back?" I asked. He didn't look up. "I want them to know they didn't scare us off." Saturday morning, I found Jerry asleep in the rocking chair on the porch. Crowbar still in his lap, boots planted like he'd grown roots overnight. The man was pushing 72 and still stood guard like a soldier. I brought him black coffee and said nothing. That kind of loyalty doesn't ask for words. The air was thick with tension. The park forum had shifted everything. What started as a fight over a pile of gravel had become a quiet revolt. Our neighbors weren't just nodding anymore. They were speaking, writing, sharing. And some of them were scared too. Martha called to say she saw a white van parked across from her house with no plates. It drove off when she approached. Roy reported that someone had rifled through his recycling bin, left a folder open on his steps like a calling card. Even Connie said someone came by the clerk's office asking questions about her employment history. "Intimidation," Carl said bluntly when we met later that day. "Classic pressure campaign. But it means one thing: they're cornered. And they're looking for ways to make others flinch first." Dad didn't flinch. Not when the brick came through the window. Not when the lights went out again that night. Not even when one of our tires was slashed Sunday morning. He simply changed the tire with calm, steady hands and said, "Desperate dogs bark the loudest before they run." Lena, meanwhile, had uncovered more. She found that the HOA had quietly approved payments to a consulting firm, registered to a P.O. box, a company with no website, no staff, and a single listed contact. A man named Blake Landon, Jim's cousin. The dots were connecting themselves now. Monday morning, Carl filed an official motion to initiate a forensic audit of the Homeowner Association's finances. The judge approved it. A third-party firm was appointed. That same afternoon, 2 certified accountants in gray suits showed up at the HOA office with clipboards and flash drives. We watched from across the street. Jim Landon came out 15 minutes later, face pale and mouth tight. He didn't yell. He didn't throw anything. He just got in his SUV and drove away without speaking to anyone. The next 48 hours were a blur. Whispers turned to talk. Residents began stopping us on the street to thank my father. Kids from the neighborhood offered to help clean up the gravel still stuck on our side yard. Teresa, the quiet gardener, brought us fresh tomatoes. Even Al, the former Marine who rarely left his porch, came down just to shake Dad's hand. Then came the letter, delivered by certified mail, signed by Jim Landon. It was a formal resignation from from the presidency of the Homeowner Association, effective immediately. He cited health concerns and a desire to focus on family. No mention of gravel, or fraud, or fear, but everyone knew. The board scrambled to appoint an interim leader. Martha nominated Lena. She won by a landslide. Within a day, the private security guards were gone. The chain link fencing rolled up like it had never existed. And the slope behind our house stood quiet, sunlit, and scarred, but healing. Carl handed us copies of the audit's preliminary findings. Gross mismanagement, improper contracts, forged approvals, and illegal allocation of funds. Charges would take time, but the process was moving. I looked over at Dad, who had gone back to digging. Same spade, same rhythm, replanting the very first apple tree we'd lost. "You want a hand?" I asked. He shook his head. "This one's personal." "No." That night, we had dinner on the porch. Just us. Jerry, Lena, Carl, and Roy. The air was warm. The crickets loud. And for the first time in months, my chest didn't feel tight with anger. We didn't toast. We didn't celebrate. We just sat together and let the silence say what needed saying. It wasn't over yet. There'd be court dates. There'd be more names and more papers and more noise. But something had changed. The hill was still ours. Fall came in slow that year, like it was watching to make sure we'd earned the peace before it laid down its golden blankets across the hills. A few weeks passed. The forensic audit went public. Full report printed in the local paper. Greystone Developments was fined. Several former board members were questioned by the county. Blake Landon's shell company was dissolved. People who never used to speak at HOA meetings suddenly had questions. Sharp ones. That was Lena's doing. She didn't just take over the board, she cracked it open and let sunlight pour through. I thought that would be the end of it. I hoped. But closure doesn't come by demand. It comes by effort. And some days it feels like effort's the only thing we still owe this land. Dad and I kept working. We rebuilt the orchard. This time with help. Neighbors who hadn't set foot on our property in decades brought tools, compost, even cuttings from their own trees. It wasn't just about fruit anymore. It was about reclamation. About showing that what was bruised could still grow. One afternoon, while we were digging near the lower edge of the property, I found a small, rusted object buried in the earth. An old sprinkler head, probably from when I was a kid. I held it up. Dad just nodded. "Still works," he said. "Just needs clearing." It wasn't a metaphor, but it was. Carl stayed involved, guiding Lena through the maze of policy and compliance. He declined any offers to join the board. "My time's passed," he said, "but yours isn't." Roy ran civics classes for local teens in the evenings. Jerry organized a neighborhood watch. And the once quiet woman with the tomatoes, Teresa, started a community garden by the park. People remembered how to care out loud. Then one morning I saw something I didn't expect. Jim Landon, walking alone down the far side of the hill. No SUV, no sunglasses. Just a man with a limp and a paper grocery bag. He saw me, stopped, hesitated, then walked over. He didn't offer excuses, didn't ask for forgiveness. He just held out the bag. "Apples," he said. "Figured it's that time of year." I took them. He nodded and left. I stood there a long time after he was gone. Later, I washed the apples and left half in a crate by the food pantry. The rest I brought home. Dad bit into one after dinner. Chewed. Swallowed. Still sour, he said. Maybe next year, I replied. That night I sat on the porch alone. The stars above me were the same as always. But the land below was different now. Not because it was fixed, but because it had been fought for. Because it had memory again. And because somewhere under all that gravel, under every cracked root and broken branch, something good had taken hold again. Maybe next year, I thought. Maybe next year we'll taste the difference.